Kai woke up early that morning. The light outside his window was still pale and soft, the kind of light that comes just before the sun rises all the way. He was 10 years old. He lived on a world called New Carthage, and at that moment in his life he did not know that the name of that world would one day mean something very different to every person in the galaxy. He sat up in bed and rubbed his eyes. His room was small. There was a bed, a table, a chair, and a shelf with a few books on it. The walls were made of a light brown material that the settlers used for almost everything: walls, floors, shelves, even the outside of the buildings. It was cheap to make and easy to work with, and it was what most people on New Carthage built their homes from. Kai got dressed in simple clothes, a shirt and pants, both a faded blue. He put on his shoes and walked out of his room into the short hallway that led to the rest of the family's home. The home was not big. It had 4 rooms. Kai's room, his parents' room, a kitchen, and a common area where they ate and talked and sometimes watched shows on a small screen mounted on the wall. His mother, Linda, was already in the kitchen. She was a short woman with brown hair that she kept tied back with a simple band. Her hands were rough from years of work. She had been a builder on New Carthage for most of her life there. She had come to this world when she was 22 as part of one of the early groups of settlers. That was before Kai was born. That was before a lot of things. She was making breakfast. It was not a complicated meal. There was a type of grain that grew well on New Carthage, and she cooked it with a little oil and some dried fruit. It was simple food, but it was warm and it filled the stomach, and that was enough. Kai sat down at the small table and watched her cook. He liked mornings like this. They were quiet. The colony was not a loud place in the early hours. People woke up, they went about their work, and they did not make much noise doing it. There was a kind of peace in it, the kind that comes when people are simply living their lives without trouble. "Where is Dad?" Kai asked. Linda turned and looked at him. There was something in her face, not quite a smile, not quite worry, something in between. "He left before dawn," she said. "He has the early shift today." Kai nodded. His father, Carl, worked for the colony's security force. It was not a glamorous job. Carl was not a commander or an officer or anything important like that. He was a regular soldier, one of about 300 men and women whose job was to keep the colony safe. They patrolled the outer edges of the settlement. They checked the equipment. They made sure nothing went wrong. It was routine work most of the time, boring even. Carl had told Kai many times that the hardest part of the job was not danger. It was boredom. Kai ate his breakfast and listened to the quiet sounds of the morning outside. Somewhere down the street, someone was hammering. A child was laughing. A machine hummed as it carried materials from one part of the colony to another. These were the sounds of a place that was still being built, still growing, still becoming what it was meant to become. He did not know that in a few hours, all of those sounds would stop forever. The first sign that something was wrong came from the sky. Kai was outside by then, walking toward the school building with 2 other children, a boy named Leo and a girl named Sarah. Leo was 8. Sarah was 11. They walked together most mornings because their homes were close to each other, and none of them liked walking alone. Sarah saw it first. She stopped walking and pointed up. The sky above New Carthage was usually a light orange color during the day because of the way the atmosphere scattered light from the sun. But in the upper part of the sky, far above the clouds, there was a bright white line. It was moving fast. Then another one appeared, then 3 more. "What is that?" Leo said. Sarah did not answer. She had seen pictures of things like that in school. She knew what they were, but she did not say it out loud because she did not want it to be true. The white lines were trails. They were left behind by objects moving very fast through the atmosphere, objects that had come from space. Ships, not human ships. The shape of the trails was wrong for human ships. They were too thick, too bright, and they were coming in at an angle that no human pilot would choose. For about 30 seconds, nothing else happened. The 3 children stood in the street and watched the sky. Around them, other people had stopped what they were doing and were looking up too. There was no panic yet. There was only confusion and a kind of heavy silence, the way silence sounds when everyone is thinking the same thought but no one wants to say it. Then the ground shook. It was not like an earthquake. Kai had felt small earthquakes before. New Carthage had them sometimes, and they were usually mild, just a gentle rocking that made the water in a glass move. This was different. This was a hard, sudden jolt, like something enormous had hit the ground far away. And then there was a sound, a deep, low boom that Kai felt more in his chest than he heard with his ears. Linda found him 20 minutes later. She had run from the kitchen to the street when she felt the shock, and she had run through the colony looking for him, pushing past crowds of frightened people, calling his name. When she found him, he was sitting on the ground next to a building, with Leo on one side and Sarah on the other. They were not hurt, but they were very quiet and their faces were white. Linda picked Kai up and held him. She did not say anything for a while. She just held him and looked at the sky, and what she saw there made her close her eyes. The orbital strike had begun. It did not come from the ships that had left the white trails. Those ships were just scouts, fast vessels sent ahead to confirm the target. The real attack came from above, from a fleet of warships that had been waiting in high orbit, far enough away that no one on the ground had seen them before it was too late. The Vrethkai Empire had not warned the colony. They had not sent a message or demanded anything or given any chance to leave. They had simply opened fire. The bombs, or what people called bombs, though they were really focused energy weapons of a kind that human science had not yet fully understood, hit the southern and eastern parts of the colony first. Those were the parts closest to the edge of the settlement, the parts where the newest buildings were, the parts that had been built in the last 2 years as the colony expanded. People lived there. Families lived there. Children lived there. The weapons did not care. The strike lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of shaking ground and bright flashes in the sky and sounds that had no name, sounds that people who heard them would carry with them for the rest of their lives, sounds that showed up in their dreams for years afterward. 4 hours of dust and smoke and the smell of burning material and the screaming of people who were hurt and the silence of people who were not screaming because they could not. Linda carried Kai toward the north. That was what everyone was doing, moving north, away from the worst of the damage, toward the underground shelters that had been built into the ridge at the northern edge of the settlement. The shelters had been built years ago, as a precaution, because the colony planners had always known that New Carthage was in a disputed zone. They had hoped the shelters would never be needed. They had been wrong. The walk to the shelter took 2 hours. It should have taken 20 minutes. The streets were full of people, and many of them were hurt, and some of them could not walk, and Linda had to stop several times to help someone, or to wait for a crowd to move, or to shield Kai's face from the dust that hung in the air like fog. Carl was not with them. He had left for his shift before dawn. His shift took him to the Eastern Patrol route, the part of the colony that was hit first and hardest. Linda did not know this when she started walking north. She found out later from another soldier who had managed to get out, a man named Roy who had a burn on his arm and could barely stand. Roy told her that Carl's unit had been on the eastern edge when the first strike hit. He told her that most of the unit did not make it out. He did not say that Carl was dead. He did not have to. Linda did not cry. Not then. There was no time for crying. There was only the walk and the dust, and Kai's weight in her arms, and the sound of the sky breaking apart above them. She put one foot in front of the other, and she kept moving, and she did not stop until she reached the shelter door and someone opened it and pulled them inside. The shelter was dark. Not completely dark. There were small lights along the ceiling, dim green lights that gave just enough glow to see by. But it was dark enough that it took Kai's eyes a long time to adjust. When they did, he saw that the shelter was full of people, hundreds of them. They were sitting on the floor or lying down or leaning against the walls. Some were crying, some were staring at nothing. Some were very still, and Kai did not understand at first that those people were hurt so badly that they could not move. There were doctors, a few of them, not enough. They moved through the crowd with supplies and did what they could. There was not much they could do for the worst cases. The shelter had not been built to be a hospital. It had been built to keep people alive for a few days, nothing more. Linda found a spot near one of the walls and sat down with Kai in her lap. She did not let go of him for hours. Other people sat near them, strangers for the most part, though some of them recognized each other from the colony. A woman named Grace sat next to them. She was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and a calm way about her that made the people around her feel slightly less afraid. Grace had lost her husband in the strike. She did not talk about it. She just sat, and sometimes she talked to Linda in a low, quiet voice about practical things, how much water they had, where the food was being given out, which of the doctors was good at treating burns. Kai listened to the adults talk. He understood some of it and not all of it. What he understood was this: something very bad had happened. People had attacked them from space. Many people were dead. His father was probably one of them. He did not say that last part out loud. He did not ask his mother about it either. He had seen her face when Roy told her about the Eastern Patrol. He had seen what happened behind her eyes. He was only 10, but he understood that some things do not need to be spoken to be known. The first day in the shelter passed slowly. There was no way to tell what time it was. The lights did not change. There were no windows. The only way to know if the attack was still happening was to listen, and for most of that first day they could still hear it. The ground shook. The walls vibrated. Dust fell from the ceiling. People held each other and waited. On the second day, the shaking stopped. No one knew at first what that meant. It could have meant the attack was over. It could have meant something else. A group of soldiers, the ones who had survived, went up to check. They came back an hour later with news that was both good and terrible. The attack had stopped. The enemy ships had left orbit, but the damage to the colony was severe. The southern and eastern districts were almost completely destroyed. The water system was broken in most places. The power grid was down. They estimated that about 14,000 people had made it to the shelters or to other safe places. The colony had held 400,000 before the attack. Kai heard this number and did not fully understand it. 14,000 out of 400,000. He did the math the way he had learned in school, slowly, carefully, and when he got the answer, he stared at the wall for a long time. It meant that for every person sitting in this shelter, there were 27 people who were not. 27 people who were gone. Carl had not always wanted to be a soldier. When he was younger, before New Carthage, before Linda, before Kai, he had wanted to be a builder. He liked the idea of making things with his hands, of taking raw materials and turning them into something useful, something that people could live in or work in or gather in. There was something satisfying about that, about the idea that the thing you built would be there long after you were gone, and that people would use it, and that it would make their lives a little easier. He had been a builder for the first 3 years on New Carthage. He helped construct the early shelters, the water collection systems, the first school. His hands were good at the work. He was patient and careful, and he did not rush, and the things he built were solid. Then the colony started to grow, and the security force needed more people, and someone asked Carl if he would join. He did not want to at first. But Linda was pregnant with Kai by then, and the security force paid better than construction work, and Carl wanted to make sure his family had enough. So he joined. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself he would go back to building when Kai was older. He never did. The work was not what he had expected. It was not dangerous, not most of the time. It was just watching and walking and making sure things were in order. But it was important work, Carl knew that. Someone had to do it. Someone had to walk the edges of the colony and make sure nothing was wrong, and Carl was good at it. He was calm, and he was steady, and he did not panic when things were difficult. Those qualities mattered more in a security soldier than skill with a hammer. He had not died quickly. This is not a pleasant thing to know, and Linda did not learn the details until weeks later, when the colony had begun to put itself back together, and when people started telling each other the stories of what had happened to them. But it is part of what happened, and to leave it out would be to tell only half the truth. Carl had been on the Eastern Patrol when the first strike hit. The weapon that hit his section of the colony did not destroy everything at once. It came in waves, short bursts of energy that burned through buildings and the ground and everything in between. The first burst hit the patrol post where Carl and 11 other soldiers were stationed. The post was destroyed. Most of the soldiers there were killed in that first burst. Carl survived it. He was thrown against a wall by the force of the blast, and his left arm was broken, and his face was burned on one side. But he was alive, and he could move, and he could think. And because he could think, he did the thing that soldiers are trained to do when everything goes wrong around them. He looked for people who needed help. He found 3 civilians near the edge of a collapsed building. 2 of them were adults, a man and a woman. The third was a child, a little girl who could not have been more than 5 or 6 years old. The man was unconscious. The woman was awake but could not walk. Her legs were trapped under a piece of wall. Carl spent the next hour pulling them free. He worked with one good arm. The pain was very bad. He did not stop. He got the woman out first, then the man. The little girl he carried in his good arm. He moved them away from the worst of the damage, toward a place where the ground was still solid and the air was not full of smoke. The second wave of the strike hit while he was doing this. Roy, the soldier who later told Linda what had happened, had been watching from a distance. He saw the second burst hit the area where Carl was working. He saw Carl try to shield the little girl with his body. He saw the flash of light, and then there was nothing left to see. Carl was 38 years old. He had come to New Carthage because he believed in something, the idea that humanity could build a new world, a place where people could start fresh and make something good. He had believed in that idea strongly enough to leave everything he had known on Earth and come to a world where no one had ever lived before. He had believed in it strongly enough to work hard, year after year, to help build that world. He had also believed that the people who ran the galaxy, the big, old, powerful species that had been around for thousands of years, would leave humanity alone. That if humans did not cause trouble, they would not be bothered. That the rules that were supposed to protect everyone would protect them too. He had been wrong about that. On the third day, a woman named Helen came into the shelter carrying a baby. The baby was very young, maybe 2 months old. Helen was not the baby's mother. She had found the baby in the rubble of a building in the Eastern District, wrapped in a piece of cloth, still alive. Helen did not know whose baby it was. She did not know the baby's name. She just carried it back to the shelter and fed it from a bottle and held it against her chest when it cried. People watched Helen with the baby. They did not say anything to her, but they watched, and something in their faces changed when they did. It was hard to say exactly what changed. It was something like the way a candle looks when it is almost out of wax, still burning, but barely, and the flame is small and thin and could go out at any moment. Seeing Helen with the baby made that flame a little stronger, not by much, but enough to notice. Roy, the soldier who had told Linda about Carl, stayed in the shelter for 2 days before he left again. His burned arm was wrapped in a bandage, and he moved slowly, but he would not rest. He said he needed to do something. He needed to find out if there was any communication equipment still working, any way to send a message back to Earth. The idea that Earth did not know what had happened, or worse, that Earth knew and was doing nothing, was something that Roy could not sit with. So he left, and he spent the next 4 days moving through the wreckage, looking for any piece of equipment that might still function. He found one. A small transmitter, buried under a collapsed wall, damaged but not destroyed. It took him another 2 days to fix it enough to send a basic signal, not a message with words, but a simple pulse that said, "We are here, we are alive, someone attacked us." He sent it over and over again, dozens of times, aimed at Earth, aimed at any human ship that might be in range to pick it up. He did not know if anyone received it. He came back to the shelter and told Linda and the others what he had done, and then he sat down and did not move for a long time. His face was very tired, but his eyes were not empty. There was something in them, not hope exactly, but something close to it. The feeling that you have done the one thing you could do, and now you have to wait. The days after the attack were hard in a way that is difficult to put into words. It was not just the pain of losing people. It was not just the fear of what would happen next. It was something else, a feeling that spread through the survivors like cold water spreading through a body. It was the feeling of being small, of being unimportant, of being attacked by something so much bigger and stronger that fighting back seemed impossible and being helped by anyone seemed unlikely. The Galactic Concordance, the big group of species that was supposed to keep the peace among the stars, sent a message within a few days. The message said that they were sorry about what had happened. It said that they were looking into it. It said that justice would be done. Most of the survivors read that message and felt nothing. A few of them felt angry. Grace, the older woman who sat near Linda in the shelter, read it once, folded the paper it was printed on, and put it in her pocket without saying a word. But that night, when the shelter was quiet and most people were trying to sleep, Linda heard Grace talking to someone in a low voice. "Justice," Grace said. The word sounded strange in her mouth, not like something she believed in, but like something she was tasting to see if it was bitter. It was bitter. They all knew it was bitter. They just did not say it out loud. Kai watched his mother during those days. She did not eat much. She did not sleep well. She sat in the corner of the shelter and sometimes looked at the wall for hours, not seeing anything. Other times she was very busy helping organize food, helping carry water, helping look after people who were hurt. She was useful, and being useful seemed to be the thing that kept her moving forward. But at night, when Kai was supposed to be sleeping, he sometimes heard her crying. Very quietly, almost silently. Just the sound of air coming out of her in small, broken pieces. He did not go to her when she did this. He understood, even at 10 years old, that there are some kinds of sadness that a person has to go through alone. On the 5th day after the attack, a group of survivors went back into the destroyed parts of the colony to look for anything that could be saved. They found very little. Most of what had been there was gone, turned to dust and ash and twisted pieces of the brown building material that had once been walls and floors and homes. One of the people in that group was a man named Tom. Tom was 30, with red hair and a quiet way about him. He had been a teacher at the school before the attack. He had lost his wife and his younger brother. He did not talk about them. He just worked, like Linda did, moving through the rubble, looking for things that might be useful, carrying pieces of broken equipment back to the shelters. Tom found something on the 6th day. It was not useful exactly. It was a piece of a wall from a house in the Eastern District. On the wall, someone had painted something before the strike, a simple picture of the sun rising over the ridge at the northern edge of the colony. It was not a good painting. The colors were uneven, and the sun was a little too big, and the ridge was not quite the right shape. But it was there, and it had survived, and Tom carried it back to the shelter and set it against the wall where people could see it. No one said anything about it, but people started sitting near it. They sat and looked at the painting and did not talk, and something in the shelter felt slightly different after that, not better exactly, but less empty. 3 weeks after the attack, something changed in the sky above New Carthage. It was night. Most of the survivors were in the shelters or in the temporary structures that had been set up on the northern ridge. The sky was clear. New Carthage had thin clouds most nights, and you could see the stars clearly. They were bright and cold and very far away, and on most nights no one looked at them because there was too much work to do during the day and too much exhaustion at night. But on this night, Kai was awake. He could not sleep. He had stepped outside the shelter to get some air. The shelters were crowded and stuffy, and sometimes he needed a minute alone, away from the sound of other people breathing and coughing and whispering. He was standing on the ridge, looking out at the dark landscape below, the rubble of the colony, half buried in dust, lit faintly by the small lights that the survival teams had set up when he saw it. A light, very far away, high in the sky, moving slowly. It was not a star. Stars do not move like that in a steady, deliberate line from one part of the sky to another. This light was moving with purpose. It was coming closer. Kai watched it for a long time. It did not come all the way down. It stayed high, far above the atmosphere, and after about 10 minutes it stopped moving and just hung there, a single bright point in the dark sky, steady and still. He did not know what it was. He was 10 years old, and he did not know much about ships or space or the way things worked up there. But he knew one thing. He knew that light was not from the Vrethkai. He had seen pictures of Vrethkai ships. They did not look like that. That light was the wrong color, the wrong shape, the wrong everything. It was something else, something human. He stood on the ridge and looked at that light for a long time, and something happened inside him that he could not name. It was not hope, exactly. Hope was too simple a word for what he felt. It was more like the feeling you get when you have been in a dark room for a very long time, and someone opens a door, and you see light on the other side, and you do not know yet what is out there, but you know it is not darkness anymore. Linda found him there 20 minutes later. She had woken up and noticed he was gone, and she had come looking for him, worried the way mothers always worry. She found him standing on the ridge, looking up at the sky, and she followed his eyes to the light. She did not speak for a while. She just stood next to him and looked at it. Then she put her arm around his shoulders. She did not pull him close or hold him tight the way she had done in the shelter. She just put her arm around him, the way adults do when they are standing next to someone and they want that person to know they are there. They stood like that for a long time, mother and son, on a ridge above a broken world, looking at a light in the sky that had come from very far away. Behind them, one by one, other people started coming out of the shelters. Word had spread someone had seen the light and they had told someone else and that person had told another. People came out into the night air and looked up and they saw it too. The single bright point, steady and still, hanging in the dark. No one cheered. No one shouted. There was no moment of sudden joy or dramatic relief. The light was just there, and the people looked at it, and something shifted in the way they were standing. Shoulders that had been pulled in and tight began, very slowly, to drop. Faces that had been set hard and closed began, very slowly, to soften. Leo and Sarah were there too. They had come out of the shelter together, the way they always did, side by side, not quite touching, but close enough that their arms almost brushed. Leo was holding a cup of water that he had forgotten to drink. Sarah had her arms wrapped around herself, the way people do when they are cold, even though the night was not very cold. Sarah looked at the light for a long time. Then she looked at Kai. She did not smile. She did not say anything cheerful or kind. She just looked at him, and in her face Kai saw something he recognized, the same thing he was feeling. The idea that the darkness might not last forever, that somewhere someone was paying attention. Leo looked at the light too, and then he looked down at the cup of water in his hands as though he had just remembered it was there. He took a slow drink and then he looked back up at the sky and his face was very quiet. Grace came out of the shelter and stood near Linda and Kai. She looked up at the light. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said very quietly, "They know we are here." It was not much of a statement. 3 words that could mean many things. But the way Grace said them, not as a question, not as a wish, but as a fact, made them feel solid, real, true. Tom was there too. He stood a few meters away, his arms crossed, looking up at the light with an expression that was hard to read. After a while, he uncrossed his arms and let them hang at his sides. It was a small change, but it was there. Kai kept looking at the light. He thought about his father. He thought about Carl standing in the rubble with a broken arm, pulling people out of the wreckage, shielding a little girl with his body. He thought about what Carl had believed, that humanity could build something good, that the rules would protect them, that the galaxy was fair. The rules had not protected them. The galaxy had not been fair, but Carl had still done what he did. He had still tried to save people. He had still put himself between the danger and the ones who could not protect themselves. Not because the rules said he should, not because someone told him to, because that was who he was, because that was what humans did when it mattered. And now up there in the dark sky something was coming, something from Earth, something that meant humanity had not looked away, something that meant the people back home had seen what happened to New Carthage and they had not simply shaken their heads and moved on. They had done something about it. Kai did not know what that something was. He did not know what was going to happen next. He did not know that the light in the sky was one small sign of something much larger, something that was already moving through the dark spaces between the stars, something that the Vrethkai Empire did not know about, something that would change everything. All he knew was that the light was there. All he knew was that the light was there. After a while, the crowd on the ridge began to thin. People went back inside one by one to sleep or to rest or to sit in the quiet warmth of the shelter, but some of them stayed. A dozen people, maybe more, standing on the ridge in the dark, looking up at that single point of light. They did not talk. They did not need to. They just stood and watched and let the night pass around them. Linda stayed with Kai until he fell asleep on his feet, something children can do when they are very tired, their bodies giving out before their minds stop paying attention. She picked him up and carried him back into the shelter, the way she had carried him through the dust and smoke 3 weeks before. He did not wake up. His face was relaxed in a way it had not been since before the attack, and Linda looked at him for a moment before she laid him down on the floor and covered him with a thin blanket. She went back outside one more time. The light was still there. She stood on the ridge alone and looked at it, and the wind moved across the landscape below and the dust settled quietly in the dark. And for the first time in 3 weeks, Linda did not feel the weight of everything pressing down on her chest. It was still there, the grief, the loss, the anger, all of it. It had not gone anywhere. But it was not the only thing anymore. Somewhere in the wreckage below, in a place where a house had once stood, the little painted picture of the sunrise still leaned against a piece of surviving wall. No one could see it in the dark. But it was there, the same way the light in the sky was there, quiet, small, and refusing to disappear. And for now, that was enough. Laura Hale had not seen the sun in 41 days. She knew this because she kept a mark on the wall of the shelter every morning when she woke up. The marks were small, made with a piece of charcoal she had found near a broken pipe. They ran in a straight line across the gray concrete, neat and even like tiny teeth. 41 of them. 41 mornings since the sky had turned white and the ground had shaken so hard that people fell off their feet and did not get back up for a long time. She was 34 years old. Before the attack on New Carthage, she had worked in the water treatment plant on the eastern side of the colony. It was not exciting work. She filtered water, she checked gauges, she fixed small problems with pipes and pumps, but she liked it. The water came in dirty and it went out clean. There was something good about that, something simple. Now there was no water treatment plant. There was no eastern side of the colony. There was just this shelter, carved into the rock under the northern ridge, and the 62 other people who lived in it with her, and the smell of recycled air and unwashed bodies, and the silence that hung over everything like dust. Laura did not talk much. Most people in the shelter did not. They moved around each other quietly, carefully, like animals in a small cage. They ate the food that was given to them. They slept when the lights were turned down. They woke up and they kept going, because stopping was not something any of them knew how to do. There was a man named Kevin Hartley who sometimes tried to talk to her. Kevin was 50 years old, heavy, with a thick beard that had grown long and tangled since the attack. He had been a teacher before. He taught children how to read. Now he just sat near the back of the shelter and stared at nothing most of the time. But sometimes he would come sit next to Laura and say something small like, "The food today is not bad," or "I think the air is fresher today." Laura would nod. She did not say much back, but she did not tell him to go away either. Kevin was the only person in the shelter who made Laura feel like she was still a person, and not just a body that was alive because it had not yet found a reason to stop being alive. There were other people in the shelter who had their own ways of getting through the days. A young man named Cole Briggs, only 22, spent most of his time fixing small things: a broken cot, a leaking pipe, a light that flickered on and off. He did not talk about why he did it. He just kept his hands busy, and when one thing was fixed, he moved on to the next. Laura watched him sometimes and felt something close to admiration. Cole was not pretending to be fine. He was not pretending anything. He was just working, and the work was keeping him from falling apart, and he knew it, and everyone else knew it too, and no one said a word about it. There was also a woman named Grace Park, who had lost her husband and her daughter in the strike. Grace did not cry. She did not scream or break things or refuse to eat. She simply sat in the corner of the shelter and looked at the wall, and her face was blank, and her eyes were open, but they did not seem to see anything. The medical team that came to check on the survivors talked to Grace every day. They brought her food and water and asked her questions. Grace answered in short, flat sentences. "Yes, no, I am fine, I do not need anything." The medical team wrote things down in their notebooks and looked worried, but Grace did not seem to notice or care. Laura felt something when she looked at Grace. It was not pity exactly. It was more like recognition. Laura understood that kind of blankness. She lived in it every day. The difference was that Laura still had the marks on the wall, the charcoal line that she added each morning. The marks were small and simple, but they were a reason to get up. They were proof that another day had passed and that she was still there to count it. Grace did not have marks on her wall. Grace did not seem to have anything at all. Laura hoped, in a quiet way that she did not say out loud, that Grace would find something someday. The rescue ships came on the 43rd day. Laura heard them before she saw them, a deep humming sound that came through the rock and made the walls vibrate. At first, people in the shelter thought it was another attack. Some of them screamed. Some of them ran to the back of the shelter and pressed themselves against the far wall, shaking. A young woman named Diane Sato started crying so hard she could not breathe, and Kevin Hartley went to her and put his hand on her back and talked to her in a low, calm voice until she stopped. But it was not another attack. It was the Navy. Human ships, big and gray and solid-looking, coming down through the thin atmosphere of New Carthage like heavy birds. Laura watched them from the mouth of the shelter, standing in the cold morning air for the first time in over a month, and the light hit her face and it hurt. The sun was too bright. She raised her hand to block it and squinted, and the ships kept coming and people around her started to cry, and Laura just stood there and felt nothing. She did not feel happy. She did not feel relieved. She felt empty, the way a bottle feels empty after all the water has been poured out. There was just air inside her, cold, flat air. They were taken aboard a transport ship called the Dorsey. It was not a fancy ship. It was a cargo vessel that had been converted to carry people, with rows of metal cots bolted to the floor and thin blankets and small cups of water handed out by soldiers who looked tired but tried to smile. Laura took a cot near the middle of the room and lay down and stared at the ceiling and listened to the engines hum. Kevin took the cot next to her. He did not say anything for a long time. Then quietly he said, "We made it." Laura nodded. She was not sure what it meant. What had they made it to? Where were they going? She did not ask. It did not matter yet. They landed on Earth 4 days later. The survivors of New Carthage were taken to a large processing center outside of a city called Denver. It was a flat gray building surrounded by other flat gray buildings, and the sky above it was white with clouds that did not move. Laura had never been to Earth before. She had been born on a colony ship and had lived on New Carthage her whole life. Earth was supposed to be the home world, the place where everything started, but it did not feel like home. It felt cold. It felt empty in a different way than the shelter had. At the processing center, people were given clean clothes, food, and a small room to sleep in. Laura's room was about the size of a large closet. There was a bed, a small desk, and a window that looked out onto a parking lot. She sat on the bed and looked at the parking lot and tried to feel something. She could not. A woman named Dr. Patricia Norris came to see her on the second day. Dr. Norris was a counselor. She was about 45, with short brown hair and glasses and a warm way of talking that made Laura feel like she was the only person in the world. Dr. Norris sat in the chair by the desk and asked Laura how she was doing. Laura said she was fine. Dr. Norris nodded and did not push. She just sat there for a while and talked about small things, the weather outside, the food in the cafeteria, a bird she had seen that morning on the roof of the building. Laura listened. She did not say much, but she listened, and when Dr. Norris left, the room felt a little less empty than it had before. Far from the processing center in Denver, in a secure facility on the other side of the country, a woman named Lauren Voss was having the worst week of her life. And Lauren Voss had had some very bad weeks. Lauren was 38 years old. She was not tall, not short. She had dark hair pulled back in a tight knot and small, sharp eyes that missed very little. She had been a military intelligence officer for 12 years, working inside the human Navy's deep intelligence branch. Her job was to find secrets, other people's secrets. She was very good at it, but Lauren Voss had a secret of her own. 3 years before the attack on New Carthage, Lauren had been approached by a contact. The contact was not human. It was a Keth Solari agent, one of the colonial organisms that communicated through chemical signals. The agent had presented Lauren with a simple offer: share information about human military activities and in return receive a large payment deposited into an untraceable account. The payment was not small. It was enough to change Lauren's life, enough to pay for things she had wanted her whole career but could never afford on a military salary. Lauren had said yes. She told herself it was harmless. The information she shared was small patrol schedules, cargo manifests, the locations of minor outposts, nothing that could hurt anyone, nothing that mattered. She told herself this for 3 years, and for 3 years it was true. The information she gave was boring. No one would have done anything with it even if they had wanted to. But then the attack on New Carthage happened. And then Commander Elaine Marsh gave the order to bring the Hearthfire array online. And Lauren Voss, who had access to deep intelligence channels because that was her job, learned about the array before almost anyone else did. She told her Keth Solari contact about it immediately. The Keth Solari did not want humanity to use the array, not because they cared about the Vrethkai. The Keth Solari did not care about anyone. They were a colonial organism, a vast network of biological nodes spread across a single star system, and they thought about the galaxy the way a spider thinks about a web, in terms of vibrations and patterns and the slow, patient collection of things that fell into the strands. What the Keth Solari cared about was balance. If humanity struck the Vrethkai hard enough to destroy their military, the balance of power in the concordance would shift. Humanity would become the strongest single force in the region, and that was something the Keth Solari did not want. They wanted every species to stay where it was. They wanted every species to need the concordance. That was how the Keth Solari kept their influence. That was how they kept their web intact. So they gave Lauren Voss a new job. They asked her to find a way to stop the array from firing. Lauren did not say no. She did not say yes either, not right away. She sat in her small apartment in the secure facility and thought about it for 2 days. She thought about the 400,000 people who had died on New Carthage. She thought about the 14,000 who had survived. She thought about the array and what it would do to the Vrethkai homeworld. She thought about war and peace and the strange, heavy weight of being a person who knew things that other people did not know. On the first night, she did not sleep at all. She lay on her bed in the dark and stared at the ceiling and went through the reasons in her head, one by one, like cards in a deck. The Keth Solari wanted balance. Balance was good for everyone. If the array fired and the Vrethkai were destroyed, the concordance would break apart. Other species would fight each other. Humanity would be alone with no allies in a galaxy full of enemies. That was the logic. It made sense on paper. On the second night, she thought about something else. She thought about a photograph she had seen once, months before the attack, on a news screen in the facility cafeteria. It was a picture of a child on New Carthage, a little girl, maybe 5 years old, standing in a field of yellow grass and holding a jar of water up to the light. The girl was smiling. The water in the jar caught the sunlight and glowed. The caption under the photo said something about the colony's water festival. Lauren had looked at the photo for a long time and then walked away and did not think about it again until now. Now she could not stop thinking about it. In the end, she said yes. She told herself it was to stop a war. She told herself that if the array fired, the concordance would fall apart, and that would be worse for everyone, including humanity. She told herself a lot of things. Some of them were even true. The plan was not complicated, but it required patience and nerve. Lauren had access to the communication channels that linked the scattered platforms of the Hearthfire array to the central command system. Her clearance was high enough to move data through those channels, and she knew the systems well enough to introduce small errors, the kind of errors that looked like equipment malfunctions, the kind that would cause delays in the final calibration. She started small. A sensor reading here, a calibration log there. Each error was tiny, invisible on its own. But together, they were supposed to slow down the timeline. Nina Calloway's 11-week deadline was supposed to stretch to 13 weeks, then 15, then longer. Long enough for the Concordance Council to intervene. Long enough for someone on the human side to realize that the array was not the only answer. Lauren worked at night, when the facility was quiet and the security scans were less frequent. She sat at her terminal and made her small changes and watched the data flow and waited. The work was slow and careful. Each change had to look natural, a calibration drift here, a minor power fluctuation there. Lauren had spent 12 years learning how systems failed, and she knew that real failures were never clean. They were messy, unpredictable, full of small signs that looked like noise. So she made her errors look like noise. She scattered them across different platforms, different time windows, different data streams. No single error would draw attention on its own. It was only when you looked at all of them together at the pattern underneath that you could see what was really happening. Some nights she sat at the terminal for hours and made only one small change. Other nights she made 3 or 4. It depended on the security schedule, on how busy the facility was, on how tired she felt. There were nights when her hands shook as she typed, and she had to stop and breathe and tell herself to keep going. There were nights when she felt nothing at all, just the cool glow of the screen and the quiet click of the keys and the slow, patient work of someone dismantling something one piece at a time. She did not think about the people on New Carthage during those nights. She could not afford to. Thinking about them would have made her stop, and stopping was not something she could do. Not yet. For 2 weeks it worked. The calibration reports showed minor delays. Nina Calloway's team spent extra time troubleshooting problems that had no real cause. The timeline slipped by 4 days, then 6. Lauren was almost calm. Almost. But Nina Calloway was not a person who accepted problems without understanding them. She was a person who dug into things until she found the root cause, even when the root cause was supposed to be random equipment failure. She ran deeper diagnostics than Lauren had expected. She brought in a specialist named Roy Tanner, a young engineer with a gift for finding patterns in messy data. Roy found the pattern in 3 days. Roy Tanner was 26 years old and had the kind of mind that saw connections other people missed. He was not flashy or loud. He was quiet and focused, and when he looked at a screen full of data, he saw it the way a reader sees words, not as individual pieces but as a whole sentence, a whole story. He brought his findings to Nina Calloway on a Wednesday afternoon. He showed her the pattern on his tablet, laid it out clearly and simply, and watched her face as she read it. Roy had been nervous before the meeting. He had gone over his work 3 times that morning, checking every step, making sure he had not made a mistake. He did not want to bring Nina something that was wrong. He did not want to waste her time or cause a problem that did not exist. But the data was clear. The errors were not accidents. They were made by a person on purpose, and the person had tried very hard to hide what they were doing. Nina read it twice, then she looked up at Roy. "Are you sure?" she asked. Roy nodded. "The errors are not random. They follow a sequence. Someone is putting them in on purpose." Nina sat back in her chair. The lab was quiet. The hum of the equipment was the only sound. She took off her glasses and pressed her fingers against her eyes, the way she always did when she was thinking hard about something she did not want to think about. Someone on the inside was trying to stop the array. She did not tell anyone right away. She sat with it for a full day, turning it over in her mind, trying to understand what it meant and what to do about it. Then she told Commander Elaine Marsh. Elaine listened without interrupting. When Nina finished, Elaine was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Find out who it is." "How?" Nina asked. "Roy found the pattern, let him follow it." Nina nodded. She went back to her lab and told Roy to keep digging. She did not tell him what he was looking for. She did not need to. Roy already knew. Roy traced the access logs for 6 days. He did it quietly, carefully, without drawing attention to himself or to the investigation. He knew that whoever was doing this was watching the same systems he was watching, and he did not want to alert them. The trail led through 14 different access points, across 3 different security levels, and through 2 layers of encryption that had been set up to hide the source. Roy peeled them back one by one, slowly, like removing bandages from a wound. Each layer revealed a little more. A timestamp here, a terminal ID there, a login signature that had been masked but not masked well enough. On the 6th day he had a name, Lauren Voss. He brought it to Nina. Nina brought it to Elaine. Elaine read the name and said nothing for a long time. Then she asked a single question. "Has she made contact with anyone outside our systems?" "Yes," Nina said. Roy traced the outbound signals. They go to a relay point in deep space. The relay is not human-owned. Elaine nodded. She did not look angry. She looked tired. She looked like a person who had just learned something she had always known was possible but had hoped would never turn out to be true. "Bring her in," Elaine said, quietly. "No one else knows about this. Not yet." Lauren Voss was arrested at 200 hours on a Thursday. 2 soldiers came to her quarters in the secure facility. They did not knock. They opened the door and turned on the light and told her to stand up and put her hands where they could see them. Lauren did not resist. She did not scream or fight or try to run. She stood up and put her hands out and looked at the soldiers with her small, sharp eyes, and she said nothing. They took her to a room with no windows. The room had a metal table and 2 chairs and a single light hanging from the ceiling. It was the kind of room that people in movies used for interrogations, and Lauren almost laughed when she saw it, because the reality of it was so much less dramatic than the idea of it. Elaine Marsh came to see her the next morning. Elaine sat down across the table from Lauren and looked at her for a long time without speaking. Lauren looked back. Neither of them moved. Then Elaine spoke. "Tell me why." Lauren considered lying. She had lied before. She was good at it. But sitting in that room in that light looking at Elaine Marsh's face, she found that she did not want to lie. Not because she was afraid of being caught, she was already caught, but because she was tired. Tired of the weight of it. Tired of carrying something that had been getting heavier every single day for 3 years. So she told the truth, all of it, the Keth Solari contact, the money, the information she had shared, the plan to delay the array, why she had said yes, what she had told herself to make it feel okay. Elaine listened to all of it without interrupting. When Lauren finished, the room was very quiet. Elaine did not yell, she did not threaten. She leaned back in her chair and looked at Lauren the way a doctor looks at a patient, not with anger, but with a kind of clear, cold understanding. "You knew what happened on New Carthage," Elaine said. "It was not a question." Lauren nodded. "You knew that 14,000 people survived, that they are still in shelters, that they have lost everything." Lauren nodded again. Elaine stood up. She did not say anything else. She just looked at Lauren for another long moment, and then she left the room, and the door closed, and Lauren was alone. Back in Denver, 3 weeks after the rescue ships arrived, Laura Hale learned that humanity had struck back. She learned it the same way most of the survivors learned it, from the news feeds on the screens in the cafeteria of the processing center. A woman on the screen was talking about the strike in a calm, professional voice, using words like decisive action and strategic response. Behind her on a large screen there were images of the Vrethkai homeworld taken from orbit, dark, distant, impossible to read. Laura sat in the cafeteria with a cup of coffee that had gone cold in her hand. Around her, other survivors were watching the same screens. Some of them were nodding. Some of them had tears on their faces. A man at the next table said, "Good," in a quiet, hard voice, and then went back to his food. Laura did not feel good. She did not feel satisfied or proud or relieved. She felt something else, something she could not put a name to at first. It took her another few days to understand what it was. It was not happiness. It was not anger. It was the feeling of watching something very large and very heavy move, and knowing that you were part of it, even though you had not chosen to be. Like a river that had been flowing for a long time, and you were just a drop of water inside it, carried along by something bigger than yourself. Kevin Hartley sat down next to her one afternoon after she had been thinking about it for a while. He did not say anything at first. He just sat there the way he always did and waited. After a few minutes, Laura said, "I do not know how I feel about it." Kevin nodded. "That is okay," he said. "You do not have to know right now." Laura looked at him. Kevin's face was tired. His beard was still long and tangled, and there were dark circles under his eyes, but his expression was calm. Not happy, not sad, just calm. "When do you think we will feel normal again?" she asked. Kevin thought about this for a moment. Then he said, "I do not think normal is something we go back to. I think it is something we build, a new kind of normal." Laura did not answer, but she thought about that for a long time afterward. The treaty was signed 6 weeks after the strike. The news came through the screens again, and this time the woman on the screen used different words: historic agreement, lasting peace, new era. Laura watched it from the same seat in the cafeteria where she had watched the strike. The coffee was cold again. She did not celebrate. None of the survivors in the processing center celebrated, not really. There was a quiet moment of something, relief, maybe, or the absence of fear, but it was not the kind of thing that made people cheer or clap. It was more like a breath being let out after holding it for a very long time. Dr. Patricia Norris came to see Laura again the next day. They sat in Laura's small room and talked for a while. Dr. Norris asked Laura how she was doing, and this time Laura did not just say, "Fine." She said, "I do not know what comes next." Dr. Norris nodded. "What do you want to come next?" she asked. Laura thought about it. She thought about the water treatment plant on New Carthage. She thought about the gauges and the pipes and the water going in dirty and coming out clean. She thought about Kevin and his calm face and his quiet voice. "I want to do something useful," she said. "I want to help build something." Dr. Norris smiled. It was a small smile, not a big one, but it was real. "Then let us start there," she said. Lauren Voss was not executed. She was not put on trial, not in the public way. What happened to her was quieter and in some ways harder. She was told that she would spend the rest of her life in a secure facility. Not a prison exactly. She would have a room, she would have food. She would have access to information carefully filtered. She would be watched always, but she would not be in chains. She would not be in darkness. What she would not have was trust, not from anyone ever again. Elaine Marsh told her this in person, in the same windowless room where they had first talked. Lauren sat across the table and listened, and she did not argue or beg or cry, she just listened. When Elaine finished, Lauren said one thing: "I did not want anyone else to die." Elaine looked at her for a long time, then she said, "I know, but people did die, and you knew they might and you kept going anyway." Lauren nodded. She had no answer for that. There was no answer for that. Elaine stood up and walked to the door. Before she left, she turned back and looked at Lauren one more time. "You will have a long time to think about it," Elaine said. Then she left. Lauren sat alone in the room and thought about it. She thought about it for hours. She did not cry. She did not feel sorry for herself. She felt something worse than sorry. She felt the full weight of what she had done, and she felt that it was heavy, and she knew that it would stay heavy, and there was nothing she could do to make it lighter. 6 months after the treaty was signed, Laura Hale volunteered to go back to New Carthage. She was not the only one. Over 2,000 survivors had signed up for the rebuilding effort. They were given new equipment, new supplies, and a team of engineers to help them start over. The world they were going back to was broken, scarred, and silent, with most of the old colony in rubble. But the northern ridge was still there. The underground shelters were still there. The ground was still solid under their feet. Laura was put in charge of the water systems. It made sense. She had done it before, and she knew the work, and she was good at it. The new water treatment plant was being built from scratch, with better parts and a better design than the old one. It would take months to finish. Laura did not mind. She liked the work. She liked the feeling of things going in dirty and coming out clean. Kevin Hartley went back with her. He did not have a job on the rebuilding team, not at first. But there were children among the survivors, small ones who had lost their parents or whose parents were too broken to take care of them. Kevin started teaching them. He did not have a classroom. He sat on a flat rock near the shelter and gathered the children around him and read to them from books that had been brought on the supply ships. The children listened. Some of them cried. Some of them laughed. Kevin just kept reading in his quiet, calm voice, and the children kept coming back. One evening, about 3 months into the rebuilding, Laura stood outside the new shelter and looked at the sky. The sun was going down, painting the clouds in orange and pink. The air was cold, the way it always was on New Carthage in the evening, and she could see her breath coming out in small white clouds. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of the settlement, people talking, tools clanging, the hum of the water purifier she had installed that morning. It was not loud. It was not quiet. It was the sound of people doing work, the ordinary, unglamorous sound of a place being built. Laura stood there and watched the sky and tried to feel what she was supposed to feel. She did not know what that was. She had spent so many months feeling nothing, or feeling things she could not name, that the idea of having a clear, simple feeling like hope or peace or gratitude seemed almost foreign to her. But something was there. Something small and quiet, like a light turned on in a dark room, not bright enough to fill the room but bright enough to see by. Kevin came and stood next to her. He was holding a cup of something warm, and he handed it to Laura without saying anything. She took it and held it in both hands and felt the heat of it against her palms. They stood there together, looking at the sky, and did not talk for a while. Then Kevin said, "The water is clean today. I tested it." Laura took a small sip from the cup. It was tea, thin and not very good, but it was warm and it was real. "Yes," she said, "it is." They stood there a little longer watching the light fade, and the settlement behind them kept working, and the sky kept turning, and the galaxy kept going on the way it always had, large and cold and indifferent to the small, stubborn lives that flickered inside it like sparks in the dark. But the sparks were still there, and they were still burning. Laura finished her tea and handed the cup back to Kevin. She looked out at the settlement one more time. The new water tower was almost done. She could see its outline against the darkening sky, tall and thin and a little crooked because the ground was uneven and they had not had time to fix it yet. It did not matter. It would work. The water would flow through it and come out clean on the other end, and the people in the shelters would have what they needed, and that was enough. She thought about Grace Park sometimes. Grace had not come back to New Carthage. She had stayed on Earth in a small apartment somewhere, and Laura did not know how she was doing. She hoped that Grace was okay. She hoped that Grace had found something, a reason, a mark on the wall, anything, but she did not know. Some things you could not know from far away. Some things you could only know by being there in the same room, sitting next to someone in the quiet. Laura thought about Lauren Voss too, though she did not know her name. She had read a short report about the arrest, just a few lines in a news feed, no details, no explanation. Someone had tried to stop the strike. Someone on the inside. Laura did not know what to feel about that. She did not feel angry exactly. She felt something more complicated, a kind of sad understanding that the world was full of people making choices in the dark, and that most of those choices looked wrong from the outside but made a kind of broken sense from the inside. Kevin said goodnight and walked back toward the shelter, his footsteps quiet on the dusty ground. Laura stayed outside a little longer, standing alone in the cold, watching the last of the light disappear behind the ridge. Tomorrow she would go back to work. She would check the filters and the gauges and the pipes, the same way she had done before the attack, the same way she would do for as long as there was water to clean and people to clean it for. The work was not exciting. It was not heroic, but it was real and it was hers, and it was something she could hold onto in a galaxy that had shown her, in the space of a single morning, just how small and fragile everything she loved could be. She turned and walked back toward the shelter, and the night closed in around her, and the stars came out, bright and cold and endless, and somewhere among them the Hearthfire platforms waited in silence, and somewhere among them the Concordance Council was meeting again, and somewhere among them the Vrethkai were rebuilding, and somewhere among them Lauren Voss was sitting alone in a windowless room, thinking about a photograph of a girl with a jar of water. And Laura Hale walked inside, and the door closed behind her, and she was warm and she was alive, and for now that was enough. End.